From the year 1942 until 1945, the Pacific Theater of War unfolded, and within the suffocating green labyrinth of the Pacific Islands, a brutal and intimate form of warfare emerged, a world where battles were fought and lives were ended at distances of 30 yards or less. It was into these claustrophobic conditions that the United States Marine Corps unleashed a weapon that would violently disrupt every tactical assumption Japanese forces held dear: the powerful 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. While the precise, detailed record of its specific combat use remains scarce, the very presence of the Winchester Model 1897 and Model 1912 shotguns among Marine units across the sweeping Pacific campaign signified a tactical reality for which Japanese military doctrine had absolutely no answer. The Imperial Japanese Army had meticulously invested decades preparing for a confrontation with Western powers. You can picture their training manuals, detailing British rifles, addressing American machine guns, analyzing French mortars, and outlining strategies against Soviet submachine guns. But shotguns, these weapons they dismissed as mere tools for hunting birds and not true implements of war, never once entered their strategic calculations. This glaring oversight would prove to be a momentous one, as American forces began to field approximately 25,000 Model 97s and a staggering 60,000 to 80,000 Model 12s into military service during the course of World War II. Japanese military thinking in 1942 was fundamentally built upon the concept of spiritual power, a belief that the warrior's spirit could triumph over any material disadvantage. This guiding philosophy was not simply empty propaganda. It was a deeply calculated response to the cold, hard industrial reality they faced. Japan, in an entire year, produced less steel than America could generate in a single month. The Imperial Army's answer was to forge each soldier into a superior close combat warrior, a place where pure spirit and relentless training would surely prevail over the cold mechanics of warfare. The tactical manifestation of this doctrine was the terrifying night infiltration attack, designed to be immediately followed by vicious close-quarters combat with rifle and bayonet. Japanese infantry drilled endlessly in these very tactics, which had already demonstrated their brutal effectiveness against Chinese forces, against British troops in Malaya, and against the American defenders in the Philippines. The sequence of a standard engagement was etched into their minds. Approach silently under the deep cover of darkness, expertly infiltrate the enemy's lines, and then utterly overwhelm the defenders at point-blank range. The very range where Japanese supremacy in hand-to-hand combat was meant to be the decisive, final factor. American shotguns completely and utterly invalidated this entire tactical framework. At those intimate ranges where Japanese doctrine confidently anticipated dominance, a single Marine armed with a Winchester Model 97 could unleash a storm of 6 loads of .00 buckshot in approximately 2 seconds, simply by using the weapon's devastating slam-fire capability. Each one of these shells contained 9 .33 caliber pellets, projecting a spreading pattern of lead that made missing in the dense, tangled jungle vegetation a near impossibility. The Winchester Model 1897, a masterwork conceived by John Browning and meticulously refined over 45 years of continuous production, became the primary shotgun for Marines in the early Pacific campaigns. The military variant of this weapon featured a compact 20-inch barrel, a distinctive perforated heat shield, and a bayonet lug fully compatible with the M1 sword bayonet. Most critically, the Model 97 was designed without a trigger disconnector, a feature that allowed for continuous, rapid fire simply by holding down the trigger while vigorously working the pump action. Its successor, the Model 1912, developed by the gifted Winchester engineer T.C. Johnson, represented a significant improvement on Browning's original design, incorporating an internal hammer mechanism that effectively prevented accidental discharges. By 1943, the Model 12 had substantially replaced the older Model 97 within Marine units, though you would find both of these rugged weapons continuing to serve faithfully throughout the remainder of the war. Military procurement documents clearly show a steady production of these shotguns, though the specific numbers for their combat deployment remain frustratingly undocumented. The ammunition these devastating weapons fired proved to be every bit as crucial as the guns themselves. Standard .00 buckshot loads carried 9 lead pellets, each one weighing 53.8 grains and measuring 8.38 millimeters in diameter. At a distance of 10 yards, the pattern would spread to about 10 inches. At 20 yards, it widened to 20 inches, and at 30 yards, the spread became a formidable 30 inches. In the chaos of jungle combat, where a clear line of sight rarely extended beyond that 30-yard mark, this expanding pattern became a powerful equalizer, compensating for the immense difficulty of taking precise aim in the dense, obscuring vegetation. The grueling Guadalcanal campaign, which raged from August 1942 to February 1943, stood as the first major American offensive action in the Pacific. The Marines of the 1st Division stormed the beaches with a diverse array of weapons, including a number of shotguns, although their exact quantity and deployment are conspicuously absent from the official battle reports. On August 21, 1942, the Battle of the Tanaru River, which was actually Alligator Creek, witnessed Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's 9-117-man detachment being virtually annihilated, leaving 789 Japanese soldiers dead. While this brutal engagement figures prominently in the accounts of the Pacific War, you'll find that primary sources attribute the staggering Japanese losses almost entirely to Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns and 37mm anti-tank guns firing canister rounds, with only a fleeting mention of any shotgun use. Throughout the relentless Guadalcanal campaign, Marines would come to employ shotguns primarily for 2 critical tasks: defending perimeters and conducting tense jungle patrols. Photographic evidence confirms this, showing point men confidently carrying Winchester shotguns during patrol operations, perfectly positioned to instantly respond to the ever-present threat of ambush in the dense, suffocating jungle terrain. However, the after-action reports overwhelmingly focus on machine guns, rifles, and artillery as the decisive weapons that truly shaped the outcomes of the battles. The jungle environment of Guadalcanal itself presented unique and formidable challenges for every weapon system, but it was particularly harsh for shotguns. The standard paper-hulled shotgun shells would readily absorb moisture from the cloying, humid air, swelling up to a point where they simply would not chamber correctly. This infuriating problem would continue to plague shotgun use throughout the entire Pacific campaign, right up until the eventual adoption of brass-cased shells. The relentless humidity of the Pacific Islands created a critical ammunition crisis that came dangerously close to negating the shotgun's effectiveness altogether. Standard commercial shotgun shells were constructed with paper hulls, which acted like sponges, soaking up moisture and swelling in the 100% humidity so common in jungle environments. Shells that would chamber with silky smoothness in dry conditions became utterly impossible to load after even a brief exposure to the tropical moisture. You can imagine the frustration as Marines reported shells swelling so severely that they had to be hammered into the chambers, an obviously impossible action during the heat of combat. This crisis lingered until March 29, 1945, the day the military officially adopted the all-brass M19 shell, formally designated Shell, Shotgun, Brass, 12-gauge, number 00 buck, M19. These moisture-proof brass cases finally restored the shotgun's reliability, but only for the war's final fading months. This late adoption date helps to explain why so many Pacific veterans rarely, if ever, mention shotguns in their memoirs. For the vast majority of the war, ammunition problems had severely and consistently limited their effectiveness. The United States military formalized its shotgun training through the publication of Technical Manual TM-9-285 on September 21, 1942. This comprehensive manual covered not only the Winchester Models 97 and 12, but also the Remington Model 11, the Stevens Models 520 and 620, and the Ithaca Model 37. Marine training for these weapons took place at Camp Pendleton in California, Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and Parris Island in South Carolina. This training emphasized very specific combat applications, providing point security during patrols, enabling rapid engagement in night defense, developing cave and bunker clearing procedures, and supporting prisoner guard duties. Marines were taught the Model 97's unique slam fire technique, a powerful tool, though instructors wisely warned against over-reliance on this feature due to its high rate of ammunition consumption and potential for barrel heating. The Marine Corps Table of Organization E-100, which became effective in 1943, officially authorized 306 shotguns for each Marine division. These weapons were distributed primarily to military police companies, pioneer battalions, and certain selected rifle squads for highly specialized duties. This specific allocation meant that while shotguns were indeed present in every major Marine operation, they always represented less than 2% of a division's total small arms. The historical record reveals a striking and telling absence. Japan never once filed a formal diplomatic protest regarding American shotgun use. This stands in sharp contrast to Germany's complaint in September 1918, which vociferously argued that shotguns violated the Hague Convention. The German protests during World War I had claimed that shotguns caused unnecessary suffering, and even went so far as to threaten the execution of captured Americans found carrying them. In contrast, Japanese military documents, both those captured during and after the war, make no specific mention of shotguns as a threat requiring any special countermeasures. Their training materials focused on countering American firepower in a general sense: the machine guns, the artillery, the flamethrowers, but they never once singled out shotguns as needing a specific tactical response. This conspicuous absence strongly suggests that while individual Japanese soldiers certainly and tragically encountered shotgun fire, the weapons never achieved a sufficient tactical impact to warrant any official attention from their high command. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers tell a similar story, showing a complete lack of references to shotguns as particularly problematic weapons. These officers discussed American material superiority, their overwhelming firepower, and their effective combined arms tactics. But shotguns appear absolutely nowhere in these detailed assessments. This profound silence in the official record is made even more striking when contrasted with the extensive Japanese documentation on how to counter American flamethrowers, a weapon that did indeed prompt very specific and desperate tactical adaptations. The New Guinea Campaign, a brutal slog from 1942 to 1945, saw both Army and Marine units operating in some of the war's most punishing and difficult terrain. The 32nd and 41st Infantry Divisions specifically requested shotguns, basing this on the Marine experiences back at Guadalcanal. The incredibly dense jungle of New Guinea, where visibility was often measured in mere single digits of yards, theoretically presented the perfect conditions for shotgun employment. However, the very same ammunition problems that had plagued the Marines at Guadalcanal proved to be even more severe in New Guinea's highlands. The relentless combination of constant rain, numerous river crossings, and extreme humidity rendered the paper-hulled shells almost completely and utterly unreliable. You could see units that had eagerly requested shotguns often choosing to leave them behind in rear areas, relying instead on their trusty M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and Browning automatic rifles. The Army's harsh experience in New Guinea clearly demonstrated that a weapon's effectiveness on paper did not always translate to combat effectiveness in practice. While the shotguns excelled in controlled training exercises, the brutal reality of jungle warfare ruthlessly exposed their critical limitations that would not be resolved until that brass ammunition finally arrived in 1945. As the Pacific War ground relentlessly onward, Marine units began to develop specific tactical doctrines for shotgun employment. It became clear the weapons proved most valuable in three very specific roles: providing point security during patrols, defending perimeters against nighttime infiltration, and supporting prisoner guard duties. For patrol operations, designated scouts would carry shotguns as the lead elements, always prepared to respond to an ambush with immediate, devastating firepower. The wide, spreading pattern of buckshot could suppress multiple enemy positions at the same time, allowing the rest of the patrol to deploy while the point man maintained a crucial element of fire superiority. This high-risk tactic demanded extensive training and absolute trust between team members, as the shotgunner operated far forward of mutual support. Night perimeter defense was another specialized application where the shotgun found its place. Marines would position shotgunners at likely infiltration points, areas where the weapon's broad spread pattern could compensate for the poor visibility of the darkness. The distinctive menacing sound of a pump-action shotgun being cycled served as both a stark warning and a powerful psychological deterrent to any would-be infiltrators. However, their limited ammunition capacity meant that shotgunners required immediate rifle support the moment they became engaged. The October 1944 return to the Philippines saw the 6th Army requesting substantial shotgun allocations, specifically for the anticipated urban combat in Manila. However, Marine participation in the Philippines ground campaign was minimal, being limited primarily to artillery support and air operations. It was the Army's 37th Infantry Division that bore the brunt of the savage Manila fighting, and they did employ shotguns in the brutal house-to-house combat, though their after-action reports place a much stronger emphasis on flamethrowers and demolition charges as the primary tools for reducing Japanese strongpoints. The urban combat in Manila starkly demonstrated both the capabilities and the limitations of the shotgun. In room-clearing operations, there is no doubt that shotguns provided devastating close-range firepower. However, the Japanese defenders quickly learned to barricade themselves in positions that prevented any close approach, completely negating the shotgun's advantage. The weapons proved to be most effective in sudden, surprise encounters rather than in deliberate, planned assault operations. The February 1945 invasion of Iwo Jima theoretically saw 3 Marine divisions fielding a total of 918 authorized shotguns. However, the island's unique environment of volcanic ash, its labyrinthine tunnel systems, and its deeply fortified positions created combat conditions where shotguns played only a minimal role. The iconic flag raising on Mount Suribachi occurred only after flamethrower and demolition teams had cleared the Japanese positions, not as the result of shotgun assaults. Marine units at Iwo Jima primarily employed flamethrowers for cave clearing, with specialized flame tanks providing crucial support. The M22 flamethrower could project a terrifying stream of burning fuel 40 yards into cave complexes, a range far exceeding that of any shotgun. Of the 26,000 American casualties suffered at Iwo Jima, existing records attribute not a single one specifically to the absence of shotgun firepower or to any failures in shotgun tactics. The long-awaited adoption of brass ammunition simply arrived too late to significantly impact the operations on Iwo Jima. The M19 brass shells only began to reach some units in late March 1945, well after the battle's conclusion. This critical timing meant that the Marines at Iwo Jima were still struggling with those same swollen, unreliable paper shells, further limiting shotgun employment in one of the war's most ferocious and intense battles. The Battle of Okinawa, from April to June 1945, saw the full implementation of all the hard-won lessons learned throughout the Pacific Campaign. The 1st and 6th Marine Divisions theoretically fielded 612 authorized shotguns, now thankfully supplied with the new, reliable brass ammunition. However, the very character of the battle, fought largely in open terrain against deeply prepared defensive positions, offered very limited opportunities for shotgun employment. The Japanese 32nd Army on Okinawa had adopted a defense-in-depth strategy, deliberately avoiding the costly banzai charges that had characterized earlier battles. Japanese forces were dug into fortified positions along the Shuri Line, fighting tenaciously from bunkers and cave systems that consistently kept American infantry at extended ranges. In these conditions, you see Marine units relying primarily on coordinated tank infantry tactics, with flamethrower tanks providing the indispensable close support. Where shotguns did see use at Okinawa was in the final, bloody stages of position reduction, when Marine squads would clear out the surviving Japanese from captured fortifications. The weapons also served military police units in the massive task of managing the movement of the civilian population. However, these applications, while important, represented only a tiny fraction of the overall combat effort. Despite the vast and extensive documentation of World War II combat, specific, detailed accounts of shotgun employment remain surprisingly and consistently rare. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project, for example, contains thousands of interviews from the Pacific War, yet any mentions of shotgun combat are incredibly scarce. The National Museum of the Pacific War holds over 4,000 oral histories, but you will find that detailed shotgun combat accounts are nearly absent from this collection as well. Eugene Sledge's powerful memoir, With the Old Breed, considered one of the finest narratives of the Pacific War, never once mentions shotguns, despite his service in a rifle company at Peleliu and Okinawa. Similarly, Robert Leckie's Helmet for My Pillow completely omits any discussion of shotguns, despite his service with the 1st Marine Division at Guadalcanal. These glaring omissions from such detailed and comprehensive memoirs strongly suggest that shotguns played a peripheral rather than a central role in the actual Marine combat experience. The few available references describe shotguns as valuable tools for very specific situations, but not as primary combat weapons. You hear veterans recall appreciating shotguns for night security and for the sudden shock of jungle ambushes, but they consistently emphasize that it was the rifles, the machine guns, and the mortars that were the weapons that truly determined the outcomes of battles. This perspective aligns perfectly with the official records, which show shotguns comprising less than 2% of a division's total armament. American industry produced a substantial number of military shotguns during World War II. Winchester alone manufactured approximately 25,000 Model 97s and between 60,000 to 80,000 Model 12s. For military contracts, Remington, Stevens, and Ithaca contributed thousands more. This massive production capacity certainly demonstrated America's industrial might, but it doesn't necessarily translate to widespread combat employment. A great many of these shotguns served in training facilities, with guard units, and in rear area security roles, rather than in frontline combat. The military police required shotguns for prisoner management and convoy security. Navy vessels carried shotguns for boarding operations and other security duties. Air bases employed shotguns for their perimeter defense. These necessary but non-combat roles absorbed a significant portion of the production. The clear disconnect between the high production numbers and the scarcity of combat accounts suggests that, while America possessed the industrial capacity to arm every single Marine squad with shotguns, practical limitations, debilitating ammunition problems, tactical constraints, and doctrinal preferences meant that most of these weapons remained in secondary, supporting roles. The shotgun served as a specialized tool, not as a standard combat weapon. To truly understand the shotgun's actual role in Pacific combat, a comparison with other weapons proves to be very instructive. The M2 flamethrower, introduced in 1943, appears in virtually every single account of cave and bunker clearing operations. You can find detailed records showing that Marines at Iwo Jima employed 27,000 gallons of flamethrower fuel, complete with meticulous documentation of its effectiveness. By stark contrast, shotgun ammunition expenditure records remain conspicuously absent from these same reports. The Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, served as the very base of fire for the Marine Squad, and there is extensive documentation of its employment and effectiveness. Every Marine rifle squad included 3 BAR teams by 1944, with detailed training programs and a well-developed tactical doctrine. Shotguns, despite their theoretical authorization, never achieved a similar level of doctrinal integration or combat documentation. Even the relatively rare M1918 Browning machine gun generated more combat accounts than shotguns did. Veterans can describe specific instances of Browning gun employment, detailing ammunition consumption and tactical impact. The profound absence of similar shotgun accounts strongly suggests their actual combat use remained quite limited, despite official authorization and high production numbers. The disconnect between the mythology of the shotgun and its historical reality reflects broader patterns in the historiography of World War II. Popular culture, heavily influenced by films and sensationalized accounts, has elevated certain weapons far beyond their actual significance. The shotgun, with its dramatic visual impact and its devastating close-range effect, naturally attracted this kind of mythologizing. Post-war films would depict Marines heroically clearing Japanese positions with shotguns, creating lasting public impressions that are largely unsupported by primary sources. Video games and popular histories have perpetuated these powerful images, establishing shotguns as iconic Pacific War weapons despite the very limited documentation of their actual employment. This myth-making process serves to obscure the more mundane reality of their primarily auxiliary roles. The mythology serves a narrative purpose, providing dramatic close combat encounters and a stark technological contrast between American and Japanese forces. However, historical accuracy demands that we acknowledge that while shotguns were present and were occasionally effective, they never came close to achieving the tactical significance of rifles, machine guns, mortars, or flamethrowers in determining the outcomes of battles. The few documented veteran accounts of shotgun use that do exist provide valuable insights into their actual employment. Marines who carried shotguns tend to recall them as being useful for specific, niche situations, but often burdensome for general combat. The weapon's weight, its limited ammunition capacity, and its specialized role meant that many simply preferred their rifles for routine operations. One Marine veteran, interviewed in 1985, recalled carrying a Model 97 on Guadalcanal. He said, "It was good for night watch and jungle paths, but you couldn't engage at range. When the shooting started, you wanted a rifle." This very practical assessment perfectly reflects the weapon's limitations in varied combat situations. Shotguns excelled in their niche, but they simply could not serve as primary armament. Another veteran from the 2nd Marine Division described the shotgun allocation. Each squad was supposed to have one, but half the time it stayed with the company gear, too specialized for everyday use. This comment clearly illustrates the gap between official authorization and practical on-the-ground employment. Units possessed shotguns, but they often found their rifles to be far more versatile for the reality of routine operations. The March 1945 adoption of the brass-cased M19 ammunition theoretically solved the moisture problem that had plagued shotguns throughout the entire Pacific War. However, this crucial development came far too late to significantly impact combat operations. By March 1945, Iwo Jima was already secured, and the Okinawa invasion was just weeks away. The Philippines campaign had largely concluded, and the remaining Pacific battles would be fought with already established tactics. The brass ammunition did prove to be valuable for occupation duties and for the planned invasion of Japan. Military planners preparing for Operation Downfall requested substantial shotgun allocations for the anticipated urban combat in Japanese cities. The use of the atomic bomb, of course, eliminated this requirement, leaving the brass ammunition's combat effectiveness largely untested. Post-war analysis suggested that the brass ammunition would have dramatically improved shotgun effectiveness had it been available earlier in the war. However, such speculation cannot alter the historical record. For the vast majority of the Pacific War, shotguns suffered from critical ammunition reliability problems that severely limited their combat utility. The absence of any specific Japanese countermeasures to shotguns provides important historical context. Japanese forces developed detailed and often ingenious responses to American weapons that significantly impacted combat. You can see them building overhead cover against mortars, digging spider holes to counter tanks, and creating reverse slope defenses against naval gunfire. The complete lack of similar shotgun countermeasures suggests they never achieved a comparable level of tactical impact. The evolution of Japanese tactics during the Pacific War focused on countering American material superiority through clever utilization of terrain and defensive depth. The shift from beach defense to inland fortifications, the development of interconnected tunnel systems, and the eventual abandonment of banzai charges all responded to American firepower in a general sense. rather than to specific weapons like shotguns. Post-war Japanese military studies extensively analyzed American tactics and weapons, but they barely even mentioned shotguns. These studies detail American artillery coordination, naval gunfire support, and tank infantry cooperation. The absence of any shotgun analysis in these otherwise comprehensive examinations suggests their minimal impact on Japanese tactical thinking. One of the most telling aspects of the shotgun story is the complete and utter absence of any statistical documentation. World War II generated enormous quantities of data: ammunition expenditure, casualty correlations, weapon effectiveness studies. Yet, no reliable statistics exist that correlate shotgun employment with enemy casualties or specific tactical outcomes. The Operational Research section, which analyzed weapon effectiveness throughout the war, produced detailed studies of artillery, mortars, and small arms. These reports quantified hit probabilities, casualty rates, and ammunition efficiency. No comparable shotgun studies exist in the archives, a fact which suggests there was insufficient combat employment to even generate meaningful statistics. Even informal estimates are conspicuously absent from the record. Veterans can readily estimate the number of rifle rounds they fired, grenades they threw, or mortar shells they expended. Similar shotgun statistics simply do not appear in memoirs or interviews. This statistical void strongly indicates that shotguns remained peripheral to the main combat operations, despite their theoretical presence within Marine units. The extensive shotgun training provided at Marine camps created expectations that combat experience simply did not fulfill. Marines learned slam fire techniques, they practiced in jungle shooting scenarios, and they qualified with both buckshot and slugs. This thorough training suggested that shotguns would play major combat roles. However, the reality of combat differed significantly from these training scenarios. The controlled conditions of Camp Pendleton did not replicate the suffocating humidity of Guadalcanal or the abrasive volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. Training targets didn't shoot back or force engagements at extended ranges. The close-range encounters that dominated the training proved to be far less common than anticipated in actual combat. This disconnect between training emphasis and combat employment parallels other World War II experiences. Bayonet training, for example, consumed extensive amounts of time despite the fact that bayonet combat was minimal. Chemical warfare preparation proved to be unnecessary when gas attacks never materialized. In a similar way, shotgun training prepared Marines for combat scenarios that rarely developed as they were expected to. The logistical challenges of shotgun ammunition supply further limited their combat employment. Each 12-gauge shell weighed approximately twice as much as a rifle cartridge while taking up 3 times the space. A Marine could carry 80 rounds of rifle ammunition in the same space, and for the same weight as just 36 shotgun shells. Supply ships prioritized rifle ammunition, machine gun belts, and mortar shells over these specialized shotgun loads. The limited cargo capacity of landing craft meant that every single ammunition case required justification. Shotgun shells, serving highly specialized roles, naturally received a lower priority than general-purpose ammunition. These logistical realities meant that even when shotguns were present, their ammunition supplies remained limited. You hear veterans recall receiving just 1 or 2 boxes of shells that had to last for an entire operation. This scarcity discouraged liberal use, further reducing the shotgun's combat impact far below its theoretical potential. Military planners had anticipated that shotguns would excel in urban combat, prompting requests for increased allocation before the battles for Manila and Naha. The confined spaces, the short engagement ranges, and the room-clearing requirements seemed to be ideal for shotgun employment. However, actual urban combat revealed unexpected limitations. The Japanese defenders in Manila and Naha created deadly kill zones that prevented any close approach. Barricaded positions, interconnected fields of fire, and numerous booby traps kept American forces at ranges far exceeding the effective distance of a shotgun. The devastating firepower that made shotguns theoretically perfect for urban combat proved to be irrelevant when Marines simply could not get close enough to use them effectively. Where urban combat did occur at close quarters, veterans report using grenades, Thompson submachine guns, and flamethrowers far more often than shotguns. These weapons offered comparable close-range effectiveness, but with much greater versatility. The Thompson's 30-round magazine capacity, for instance, far exceeded the shotgun's 6 rounds, proving crucial in sustained engagements. While shotguns left a minimal documented impact on Japanese military thinking, they achieved a disproportionately large cultural significance in American military mythology. The image of a Marine with a trench gun, clearing out Japanese positions, became iconic despite its limited historical foundation. This cultural impact vastly exceeds the weapon's actual combat contribution. The shotgun came to represent American pragmatism, the idea of using hunting weapons for military purposes, regardless of European military conventions. This narrative appealed to the American self-perception as practical innovators, unconstrained by traditional military thinking. The mythology served propaganda purposes, even if the combat reality proved to be far more complex. Japanese military culture, which focused on rifles, machine guns, and artillery as proper military weapons, never incorporated shotguns into their conceptualization of warfare. This cultural blind spot supposedly left them unprepared, though the historical record suggests their lack of preparation stemmed more from the shotgun's limited actual employment rather than from a cultural oversight. The story of the shotgun illustrates the complex and often fraught relationship between technology and military doctrine. The weapons themselves functioned exactly as designed. They were devastating at close range with spreading patterns ideal for jungle combat. However, their successful employment required very specific tactical conditions that rarely materialized in actual combat. Marine doctrine evolved continuously throughout the Pacific War, but shotguns never achieved full integration into their tactical systems. They remained supplementary weapons, tools for specific situations rather than integral components of squad firepower. This doctrinal marginalization reflected practical combat experience far more than any technological limitations. The contrast with successfully integrated weapons is instructive. The bar became central to Marine squad tactics, with a detailed doctrine for its employment. The flamethrower revolutionized bunker clearing, generating extensive tactical development. Shotguns, despite all their theoretical potential, never prompted a similar doctrinal evolution. Military administrative records provide yet another perspective on shotgun employment. Requisitions, repair reports, and replacement requests all document weapon usage patterns. You will find rifle and machine gun parts appearing constantly in the supply records, indicating heavy and continuous use. Shotgun parts requests, however, remain notably rare, suggesting very limited wear from combat employment. Armora reports from Marine divisions show similar patterns. Rifles and machine guns required constant maintenance due to combat use. Shotguns, on the other hand, primarily needed cleaning to prevent storage corrosion rather than repairs from firing wear. These maintenance patterns clearly indicate that most shotguns spent far more time in arms rooms than they ever did in combat. Ammunition requisitions tell the exact same story. Divisions requested millions of rifle rounds and hundreds of thousands of machine gun rounds for major operations. Shotgun shell requests remained consistently modest, often for training purposes rather than for combat consumption. These dry administrative records serve to corroborate the limited combat employment suggested by veteran accounts. The experiences of other nations provide valuable context for evaluating American shotgun employment. British and Australian forces in the Pacific possessed minimal numbers of shotguns, relying instead on rifles and submachine guns for their jungle warfare. Their combat effectiveness without shotguns suggests that the weapons simply were not essential for success in Pacific combat. Soviet forces, fighting in incredibly varied terrain from urban Stalingrad to rural Kursk, never adopted combat shotguns despite their massive small arms production. Chinese forces, engaged in constant close-quarters combat throughout their long war with Japan, similarly did not employ shotguns, despite their desperate need for effective weapons. This international perspective suggests that shotguns represented just one tactical option among many, rather than an essential combat capability. Nations achieved similar combat outcomes through different combinations of weapons, indicating the shotgun's tactical impact remained marginal, despite America's impressive production capacity. Post-war military analysis evaluated the weapons of World War II for future conflicts. The Army's Infantry Board conducted extensive studies to determine which weapons merited continued development. Rifles, machine guns, mortars, and recoilless rifles all received priority. Shotguns, however, earned minimal attention, suggesting their performance in World War II did not justify major future investment. The Korean War saw only limited shotgun employment, despite extensive close-quarters combat. Marines in Korea carried M1 Garands, bars, and carbines rather than shotguns for their patrol operations. This practical choice made by combat veterans of the Pacific War indicates their own assessment of the shotgun's actual versus its theoretical utility. Vietnam would see a renewed use of the shotgun, particularly modified commercial models for jungle patrols. However, even in the incredibly close-range combat of Vietnam, shotguns remained specialized weapons, tools for pointmen and tunnel rats rather than standard armament. This pattern continues to this day, with shotguns serving very specific military roles rather than functioning as general combat weapons. The historical record supports several key conclusions about the Japanese encounters with American shotguns in World War II. First, while shotguns were indeed present in Marine units throughout the entire Pacific campaign, their actual combat employment remained severely limited due to ammunition problems, tactical constraints, and doctrinal preferences. The March 1945 adoption of brass ammunition simply came too late to significantly impact combat operations. Second, Japanese forces never developed specific countermeasures to shotguns because the weapons never achieved a sufficient tactical impact to warrant any special attention. The complete absence of shotgun references in Japanese military documents, training materials, and post-war analyses indicates their marginal role in determining combat outcomes. Japanese tactical evolution responded to American firepower in general, not to specific weapons like shotguns. Third, the disconnect between the authorized shotgun numbers and their documented combat employment reveals the vast gap between theoretical capability and practical utility. While Marine divisions were authorized 306 shotguns each, the vast majority of these remained in secondary roles, guard duty, training, and rear area security, rather than frontline combat. Veterans' accounts, on the rare occasions they mention shotguns at all, describe them as useful tools for specific situations, but never as primary combat weapons that change the outcome of a battle. Fourth, the mythology that has grown up around the Pacific War shotguns far exceeds their documented historical impact. Popular culture has elevated shotguns to an iconic status, despite the very limited primary source evidence of their combat effectiveness. This myth-making obscures the more mundane reality that it was rifles, machine guns, mortars, and flamethrowers that truly determined the outcomes of battles. While shotguns certainly filled specialized niches, the shotgun story offers broader lessons about military innovation and adaptation. Technical capability alone does not guarantee tactical impact. Weapons must be integrated into doctrine, logistics, and training to achieve true combat effectiveness. Shotguns possess theoretical advantages, but they failed to overcome the practical limitations that ultimately restricted their employment. The Japanese military's failure to anticipate shotguns proved to be irrelevant, because shotguns never achieved the tactical impact necessary to exploit this oversight. Their lack of preparation actually reflected an accurate assessment of the shotgun's marginal role, rather than a critical oversight. The weapons that actually determined the outcome of the Pacific War, artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, flamethrowers, all received the appropriate level of Japanese attention. America's industrial capacity to produce thousands of military shotguns demonstrated its manufacturing prowess, but this did not translate directly into combat power. The ability to make weapons far exceeded the ability to employ them effectively in the unique conditions of the Pacific. This disconnect between production and employment illustrates that industrial might alone does not guarantee a tactical advantage. The story of Japanese infantry encountering American shotguns in World War II ultimately reveals far more about military mythology than it does about combat reality. While shotguns were present and were occasionally effective in very specific situations, they never achieved the devastating tactical impact that popular accounts suggest. Japanese forces were indeed unprepared for shotguns. But this unpreparedness proved to be largely irrelevant, because shotguns played only a marginal role in determining battle outcomes. The verified historical record, the production numbers, the training manuals, and the organizational tables all confirm the shotgun's presence in Marine units. However, the profound absence of detailed combat accounts, statistical documentation, and Japanese countermeasures indicates their limited actual employment. Veterans who carried shotguns recall them as specialized tools, useful in specific situations rather than as primary combat weapons that could change the outcome of a battle. The March 1945 adoption of brass ammunition finally solved the critical moisture problem, but it came too late to impact the major Pacific battles. By the time reliable ammunition became available, the war was essentially decided through the island-hopping campaigns that relied on combined arms tactics, overwhelming firepower, and naval supremacy, not on close-quarters shotgun encounters. The Japanese military's lack of a specific response to shotguns reflected an accurate tactical assessment rather than a critical oversight. They correctly focused their efforts on countering the American weapons that actually determined the outcomes of battles: artillery, naval gunfire, aircraft, and flamethrowers. Shotguns, despite their theoretical close-range superiority, never achieved a sufficient tactical impact to warrant any dedicated countermeasures. Modern military forces continue to employ shotguns for specialized roles: breaching doors, using less lethal ammunition, and for specific close-quarters situations. This limited contemporary use actually parallels their real World War II employment far more accurately than popular mythology suggests. The weapons serve important but very narrow purposes, rather than functioning as primary combat arms. The transformation of a limited historical reality into an extensive popular mythology illustrates how war stories can evolve far beyond their factual foundations. The dramatic image of Marines with shotguns clearing out Japanese positions appeals to narrative needs that historical accuracy simply doesn't satisfy. The mythology serves cultural purposes, demonstrating American pragmatism, technological adaptability, and combat innovation. Even if the historical record proves to be more mundane, understanding the actual role of shotguns in the Pacific War combat requires separating the verified history from the accumulated mythology. The weapons were present, they were authorized, and they were occasionally effective, but they never achieved the tactical significance that would justify their prominent place in popular Pacific War narratives. Japanese infantry may never have expected 12-gauge American shotguns in the assault, but this surprise proved largely irrelevant to the battle outcomes that were determined by superior American firepower, logistics, and combined arms tactics. The verified history tells a less dramatic but far more accurate story. Shotguns served as specialized weapons for particular situations. They were handicapped by ammunition problems until it was too late in the war. They were employed primarily in secondary roles, and they never achieved sufficient tactical impact to significantly influence the outcome of the Pacific War. This reality may lack the dramatic appeal of mythology, but it represents the historical truth that emerges from a careful examination of primary sources, veteran accounts, and military records. In the end, the story of Japanese forces encountering American shotguns reveals as much about military myth-making as it does about actual combat. The weapons achieved a cultural significance that far exceeded their tactical impact, becoming symbols of American pragmatism and firepower despite their limited documented combat effectiveness. This disconnect between mythology and reality serves as a powerful reminder that popular military history often emphasizes dramatic narratives over mundane historical truth. The Japanese infantry, who never expected 12-gauge American shotguns in the assault, were right to be surprised by their presence, but they would have been wrong to fear their overall impact. The weapons that actually defeated the Japanese forces in the Pacific, overwhelming industrial production, superior logistics, coordinated combined arms, and relentless naval power, proved to be far more decisive than the occasional blast of buckshot in the jungle. The shotgun story, when properly understood, illustrates not a tale of American tactical innovation through unexpected weapons, but rather the complex and intricate relationship between military capability, combat employment, and historical mythology in the crucible of the Pacific War.